Welcome to episode 4 of Write Your Novel from Start to Finish. I'm Ken. This is Pork Chop. And we're going to do something a little different today, which is actually, we're going to break one of the rules I've been trying to set for you, which is this idea that there's no actual shortcuts and there's no secrets to writing a novel to make life a lot easier and all this other stuff. I've basically been telling you, don't buy into the clickbait that you see on videos and websites and advertisements, right? But there is actually, I think, one thing you can do before you start actually writing your novel that'll make your life a little bit easier. And that is to write the last chapter first, okay? And so if you remember from episode 3, we were talking about the arrow diagram. And we were talking specifically about having this protagonist on one side, and then drawing an arrow across the paper, and then putting the protagonist's goal on the other side. And then what we do is we fill in the space between those two ideas, those two concepts, with challenges the hero or protagonist will face over the course of the novel, right? And writing the ending first, writing the last chapter first, is a great way to just organize your thoughts and have in your imagination some sort of end game for your story, okay? So for example, in my story, I'm writing a mystery and my main character is Sam, and his main goal is to solve the murder that he witnesses, right? So what I did this morning was I made myself a cup of coffee. I scrolled through Twitter a little bit because I get distracted really easily. And then I got to work writing this last chapter. And in this last chapter, I put Sam and the murderer and all of the surviving characters and suspects into a room. And I had Sam I imagined Sam just walking the murderer through how he investigated the murder, what he found, the clues he came across, basically how he figured out who the murderer was. Kind of like, almost like the ending of like a classic Sherlock Holmes story. So another thing I did was I had the murderer respond. The murderer was filling in the gaps for Sam, like telling him the stuff that Sam missed or mentioning some of the things, some of the reasons why the murderer did what he did, okay? And so at the end, I had this pretty clear ending that I needed to get to. And now as I'm writing the book itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to constantly go back and reference the last chapter to make sure that everything in my book lines up, okay? So you can imagine for a mystery, this is pretty important. A lot of beginning writers and a lot of intermediate writers too, when they're writing a mystery, they think they have a tendency to either wing it and just go from chapter to chapter and hope hope they get to an ending where the murder is solved. And then, even if they have an outline, usually the outline gets thrown out the window because, in the middle of writing, you usually get some creative ideas and then your story takes a fork in the road and, blah, 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 right? But having the ending done, you don't have to worry about making the mistake of creating a story whose elements just don't line up, okay? And this is a huge issue with mysteries. If your mystery's clues do not lead to the correct suspect, the reader's going to feel cheated, okay? And if there's one thing you want to keep in mind whenever you're writing any sort of genre fiction, whether it's romance, sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, horror, readers are voracious. And they have an expectation of a certain level of quality that if you're not meeting that level of quality, they can feel cheated. So imagine in a mystery, you didn't plan out your ending and your story gets to the end and it turns out to, the killer turns out to be this person. But over the course of the story, you didn't really leave the right clues. You didn't really, some of the stuff just does not add up. And that becomes almost like the reader will feel cheated by the end of the story, okay? So that's one benefit to writing the last chapter. Another benefit to writing the last chapter that I think is even more important, and this works for every single genre, is it puts in your imagination that end game, right? I think that's really the key to crafting a good ending, is you want to make sure that you have some sort of closure at the end of your story. And once you've figured that out, once you've figured out the closure, you can go back and write the story and you know where it has to lead, right? It's like you're walking a trail, like you're hiking a trail, right? And you know where you want to end up. And then from there, you can take different forks in the trail. You can follow different side trails. As long as you know that those side trails are going to lead to your destination, you're going to be fine, right? So another benefit that I think is very underutilized when it comes to writing is you don't have to use this final chapter when you get to the end of your story, okay? Think of it instead as like a placeholder that contains all of the information that you need to craft the full story, but it's not something that has to exist in the same form once you get to the end, like once you actually write the end of your story. So for example, in my book, I'm not going to have Sam in a room with the murderer and a couple of the suspects. That's not actually going to happen. I'm a big fan of writing dynamic, chaotic, explosive endings. And so when I get to that point, I know for a fact I'm going to come up with a way better idea for my ending. But the main points, the main beats of that final chapter are going to remain. I'm just going to transfer them into that new situation. But by and large, the ending is going, like the actual details of the ending are going to remain the same. So for example, how the killer gets caught, the clues the killer leaves, the things that Sam discovers over the course of the novel that lead to this specific killer. I'm going to keep all that. I'm just going to change the setting and the situation where it takes place, okay? If you like this idea, if you feel like you want to try this, but you're worried that it's going to limit your creativity when you start writing your novel, fear not, okay? Because if you come up with an idea midway through your novel that you didn't include in the ending, and you're like, oh man, this would be great if this character revealed this thing here, right? In this moment, in this scene, you can go back to your ending that you wrote, your final chapter that you wrote, and you can find a way to include that new information. And then what you're doing is you're keeping track of this interesting stuff that happens in your book by adding it to the ending. And so you never have to worry about accidentally leaving a clue or accidentally leaving a piece of information or developing your character in some way that won't make sense when you get to the end, right? Because you're keeping track of everything in that final chapter. So for me, this makes sense because I really like to know what my destination is. And I'm one of those writers who, if I don't have an ending in place and I just keep writing and I don't really know how to stop the story because I don't have that ending in my head. And so I use this whenever I'm writing a longer story. And I think you should at least try it, give it a shot, see if it works for you. If it doesn't, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. I just think when it comes to creating a good ending, and making sure that your story leads up to that ending, I think starting with the final chapter makes the most sense, okay? So again, give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. When we go into the next couple of episodes, we're going to focus on preparing for Act 1 and actually writing Act 1 and deciding what is it that we need to accomplish before we move into the middle section of our story, which is where most of the events and challenges are going to take place. Okay, so keep it up, keep up the good work, keep writing. Try to get one chapter done over the course of the week, and remember, you don't have to set goals for yourself. Just find opportunities to write and take those opportunities.